Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Alex, for the introduction. Besides JVS Cranes, the rental company, I'm also Chief Financial Officer at Neuron Soundware, where we recognize broken machines using sound and artificial intelligence. So JVS Cranes is a Czech rental company established by my father. We have about 75 tower cranes and are located mainly in Otrokovice. We have just recently opened a new office building there. It's about 2 hours of drive from here, up north. I personally reside in Prague, so if you want to visit me, and you're very welcome, come to Prague. There's much better airport than in Otrokovice. We are aiming to be the local innovator. Our teams are capable of installing and servicing anti-collision systems and special camera systems to us and our clients. And we have also invested into Neuron Soundware, where we do predictive maintenance using artificial intelligence and sound. So today's topic is valuation of tower cranes, and let's see how a typical valuation is done, how a typical residual value is calculated. First, we need to get our cash flows, our past cash flows. Let's say and this is a real crane that we own. It's a 2006 Liebherr 110 ECB. Which we have purchased for 185,000 euro 10 or 11 years ago. We know what are our cash flows, so the purchase price, rent, costs, and we know that we need to, the remaining value, or let's call it costs that we need to still cover is 39,000 euro. And there was an inflation in the meantime, so that 39,000 euro would be 46, what we need to cover to be even. And we also need some margin, so let's be greedy and let's have a 40% margin in those 10 years, which would make price of a tower crane to be, or the residual value of the tower crane to be 65,000 euro. Now, this is a wrong calculation. Some of you probably see where the mistake has been done. The real residual value of this tower crane is 133,000 euro. But before I jump into explaining where the mistake was made, let's see some general stuff. Valuation is always going to be about cash flows. That's how much you put in versus how much you get back. So in terms of the investment cycle, I will always have as my first cash flow, first cash outflow, the purchase price. That would be represented by the circle on the left. And throughout the time, as I own the tower crane, I generate cash, or I generate savings on rental if I'm a company that operates the crane. And that cash inflow is represented by the circle in the middle. And this money needs to cover also all the other costs. So costs to maintain the crane. So that is direct costs, people, spare parts, suppliers, indirect costs, the management fees, legal fees, and innovations. And we also need to cover our profit or interest expense. And at the end, you need to be left in that circle with a piece of the pie, piece of the circle, after you sell the crane, which represents the same amount of money that you have invested into the tower crane in the beginning, plus of course inflation. So you need some reinvestment amount to have. Now, why I'm showing this is pretty obvious. I mean, this is very, very simple. But why I'm showing this is because the last part, the reinvestment part, is being forgotten, especially when you're a rental company which uses its own funds to purchase the cranes and to own the cranes themselves, and that doesn't use the external financing companies. So you need to be left at the end with the same amount of money as you were in the beginning. So valuation is determining today's value of cash flows, and now what cash flows? It can be, we can look in the back on a past cash flows, and this way we will calculate our residual value. Or we can look in front on a future cash flows, future income and outcomes, and this way we will calculate our real value of the tower crane. And this is actually what you need to do when you want to value your tower crane or any asset, companies, any assets generally. There's also a third way how you can value a tower crane, and that is by looking at the market. So this way you will receive the market value. But that might be misleading because market value might give you a wrong perception about the real value of the tower crane. So the actual valuation, these three approaches are best done, or at best done, in an Excel spreadsheet. So if you want, you can write this link. I've created such an Excel spreadsheet. So if you want to use my approach, just download it. I have copied that link to the following slides. So residual value is present value of all past cash flows. So let's say these bars are my cash inflows and cash outflows throughout the time. All you need to do is just summarize them on a yearly basis and then bring those prices to a net present value and sum this up. This will give you the residual value of a tower crane. That would be the bar on the right. Residual value is great to identify your minimal price after you've owned the crane a long time. And it's also great in combination with market prices to identify past metrics, which you can then later on use in the other model, and that is the future cash flow model. So the future cash flow model will give you the real value, the same way as the previous one. You will, as the past cash flow model, you will have to recalculate the future cash flows into today's value. In order to assume your future cash flows, you need to do some assumptions, or in order to have your future cash flows, you need to do a few assumptions. And these are, I need to assume my yearly revenue, and from that, my yearly profit. Now, usually, and in our case, our yearly profit from a tower crane is about 60% of the rental price. There's also other metrics that you might use, but for us, 60% works. Normally, we dig this data from our ERP system, but if I don't have this data, I use 60%. Also, I usually subtract reinvestment reserves. So this is the circle at the end of the investment cycle that I was showing in the slides, in one of the first slides. And I need to decide about my strategy. What do I want to do with the investment? Strategy is usually setting up the time when you're going to sell it, or in case you want to own it forever, what is the lifetime of a tower crane? And lifetime of a tower crane is actually what valuators differ, why the valuations of each of one of the tower cranes is different. Because some valuators will believe that the tower crane can produce cash only 35 years. Some of them will believe that it can produce 50 years. And why would a crane not produce cash another 150 years? Because how different is a tower crane from an Eiffel Tower? It's a steel construction anchored to the ground. It has hoisting machines inside, and it's been producing cash 150 years. And it will definitely produce another 150 years. So setting up the lifetime of a tower crane is something that differs us in doing the right valuations. The last assumption that you need to do is to set your reasonable expected return on investment that you want from the investment into a tower crane. For some, again, it could be 5%. For some, it's 10%. In our case, and in this environment, in this financial environment of low interest rates and everything, it's rather around 5% and less return on investment on tower cranes. So the real value you calculate by bringing each one of the future assumed cash flows into today's value and summing them up. Again, the best way is to do it in an Excel spreadsheet. Now, very briefly about comparing market prices. If you want to derive your value of the tower crane from the market, you will face two things. You need to normalize the prices that you receive from the market, because none of the offers is the same. There are differences in configurations and in age. And the difference in configuration can be done by comparing just the upper parts of the tower crane. How do I do that? Normally, the bottom part of the tower crane, the price of the bottom part of the tower crane doesn't really change, whether it's a 5-year-old crane or 15-year-old crane. So I personally know what are the prices of each one of the tower sections, and I just subtract the bottom part from the upper part, and then I compare apples with apples. I compare only the upper part with the upper part of two used cranes. Also, we need to account for the differences in ages when you're comparing two old cranes or prices of two old cranes. How's this done? What I use is an implied purchase price. What is an implied purchase price? I use a depreciation function. Now, this is how cranes depreciate throughout time. You know, on the bottom is age of the crane, and price is what we're looking at, or what we're looking at at this moment. So implied purchase price is bringing the actual today's value or today's offered market price of a used crane into a time zero, and then comparing these implied purchase prices between two cranes that are of different age. So the implied purchase price is a function of current price, crane price, and a coefficient. That coefficient is actually a depreciation rate at which the crane depreciates every year. And this is different for different types of cranes, for different producers. It's different in different stages of the market. And it's also different for a lower and upper part of the crane. So the lower part depreciates more slowly than the upper part. And in my experience, it's about 4 to 6% for the lower part, about 6 to 7% for the upper part. What's great about the implied purchase price is that you can compare the implied purchase price of a used crane with the price of the new crane from your dealer. And this way you might find out that it's better to buy a new crane, or that the old crane is overpriced. So let's go back to our example. Residual value of the 2006 110 ECB. This is how we have calculated before. So we came to a residual value of 65,000 euro. This is how we should be doing it. Actually, it's at best done in the Excel spreadsheet. So these are just data from the Excel spreadsheet. The beginning is pretty much the same. We're getting all our past cash flows. and we're bringing them into today's value. So these are these first 3 or 4 lines. What's different from the calculation that I've done before is that I'm calculating differently the interest expense, the return on investment from the tower crane. And this way I'm fine with a 3% per year in those 3% per year, and in those 10 years, that makes 75,000 euro. So altogether, the residual value of this same crane that I thought was 65,000 is actually 133,000. And I haven't paid tax from it, because once I sell it, I have a clean profit, so I'll have to pay tax. So all of a sudden, I'm not such a great businessman having 40% margin. All of a sudden, I'm having a residual value which is actually higher than what the market offers me. And I've chosen this crane intentionally because this is our worst performing 110 ECB, because we have purchased it in the boom times in 2008. It was last year of the boom times, and and it was producing revenue throughout the crisis. We have another 210 ECBs, which are actually younger, and their residual value is lower, 120,000. So altogether, if I sell the whole fleet, it would be probably somewhere between 120 and 133, my minimum, if I wanted the 3% per year return on investment. So the real value is calculated the same. I'm not going to go through details. For this crane, I am assuming that I will own the crane until it's 30 years old, so I have still 17 years of revenue in front of me. And I'm still assuming the 3% interest expense or return on investment. So calculating the future discounted cash flow gives me a real value of this tower crane of 145,000 euro. The market at this moment offers for this crane about 125 to 130,000 euro, and it used to be less. So am I going to sell the crane? Probably not. It just doesn't make sense, because I can still make on it 145,000 in today's money, but I still do sell the crane. Why would I sell the crane? Because we're motivated sellers. We have decided with my brother on a strategy to sell the last 3 top slewing cranes of this producer, because it just doesn't make sense for us to have only 120 or 150 meters of tower sections of this tower crane on our yard. So we've been, in those 27 years, collecting in our ERP system a lot of interesting data and metrics. And also I've been collecting personally all the offers that I have received for different cranes. And this, putting this data together gives pretty interesting results in, for example, in an implied return on investment. This is the money, this is an implied number. This is the money that I would receive, or a return on investment that I would fix if I sold these cranes that I've owned for a long time. And as you can see, the return on investment, which are the bars on the right, which is the percentage on the right, jump up and down. It just doesn't make sense at the first look. If you look, for example, at the 63K and 71K, they're pretty much the same cranes. And one of them produces only 1% per year return on investment, and the other one 12%, which is beautiful. That's above inflation. Any investor would be happy, extremely happy with 12% per year. But every investor will not want to invest into 1% per year. So it's like marginal numbers. And I'm using the same metrics. I'm using the same approach to doing things. I'm digging from the same ERP system. And there's a lot of cranes that we had 12 and 14, gives you a pretty interesting average. Where the problem lies is the third column, average age when purchased. So Liebherr 63K we used to buy old, on average 11.4 years old. While the Liebherr 71K we purchased new or almost new. So one could derive out of this, and it makes sense looking at the depreciation function that I was showing, that if you want to do this business long term, and if you want to have a good return on investment, you have to be purchasing used cranes as well. But there's one big problem in today's market. The market supply of used cranes is very low. There's not many cranes actually in the used cranes market that would be, at least for us, interesting. And if you look at this graph, this is a production line of one of the major producers of tower cranes. And most of the other producers had a similar characteristics. So if you're like us, a rental company which wants good return on investment, so means you need to be buying used cranes, but you don't want to offer your clients really old cranes, you have a strategy in purchasing used cranes. So in our case, our strategy is purchasing not older than 10 years. But what cranes am I going to be buying? There's not many actually on the market, because in 2009 everything dropped, and since then there's not many cranes produced since. And what's more, the used crane, this is an implied purchase price of offers that I have received in these different years for a Liebherr 110 ECB. To stay on the same line, and as you can see, the best times to purchase Liebherr 110 ECB were used crane, were 2010 to 2015. It seems that today the implied purchase price of used cranes is higher than the price of the new crane. So it actually doesn't really make sense to buy used crane at this moment. So what are we left with? Let's summarize the facts. New cranes mean lower return on investment. Used cranes are limited from the year 2009, and they are also expensive. And there's new norms that just came out in Europe, which require what old cranes will never have. This is the safety standard norm and the anti-collision norm. They're so detailed that no old cranes will be able to deliver it. So what does this imply? What are our options as investors into tower cranes? We can reconsider our purchasing strategy and buy really old cranes, but that is not gonna meet the last fact that there are the new norms. Or if we don't change the way we're doing business, that means if we don't innovate, we will have to reconsider our rental prices. Because does it make sense to invest into tower cranes, into machines which are very risky, in companies where we're employing people which are every day in threat of losing their life, for 3 to 5% return on investment? It doesn't. So reconsidering our rental prices is not something that I wish for. I believe this is an inevitable future if we don't change the approach we're doing our businesses. So, what are the key takeaways? Just very quickly, when you're valuing a tower crane, always look at the future cash flows. Do not forget about inflation, reinvestment reserves, and compound return on investment. You will not forget about it if you use my spreadsheet. Also, if you want to have better return on investment, buy used cranes. But at this moment, they're very limited. So maybe it's time to reconsider our rental prices. So before I go, I would like to let you know that you can contact me to value your tower crane, to buy our used cranes, if you're interested in those 110 ECBs. If you want to buy or sell a business, my biggest passion is valuing of equity and firms in general. So I've valued many companies and JVS Cranes as well. So let me know if you're interested to see those valuations. Also, we're looking in Neuron Soundware for new clients, besides the big companies that we're serving today. So if you're interested in predictive maintenance using artificial intelligence, if you're interested for your machines to be recognized whether they're broken or not, just give me a talk. And also, we're looking for partners to represent Neuron Soundware on your markets. And thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Thomas. Who'd like to ask a question, please? Too late? No? Right, well, I have a question, Thomas.
Oh, my God.
Just a little one.
Okay.
Some rental businesses, telehandlers, that kind of thing, they're changing their financial model by extending the life of the equipment, keeping it longer in the fleet, so they're refurbishing it. Makes the economic life longer. Is that something that you could do with tower cranes? Do you do that? Is it worth it?
Yeah, we do that by changing the slewing rings, because that's one of the components that are main reason for someone to sell a tower crane. But otherwise, we're trying to keep our cranes younger. So in terms of our experience, we are rather focusing on innovations and on delivering to our clients what others cannot deliver. So.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much, Thomas.
Thanks.
For that.
And I have the privilege to be the last speaker.
Yeah.
So I wanted to thank the KHL team, not only to Alex, but the whole team that organized this whole event. And not only this event, but all the previous events. I've visited most of them. I've presented on some of them, and I've always enjoyed it. And I've always brought a lot of interesting information from these events. So I hope you are taking interesting information from this event as well. So give a big hand to the KHL team. Thank you.